everyone. We're actually done with the first unit. We went over various topics. Just last class last week, we went over diffusion, distance decay, location concepts. So, pretty much, we went over various spatial concepts. Before that, we looked at maps, various kinds of maps, parts of a map, what are maps. That was an introduction to maps, and we also um, looked at the difference between human and physical geography, what geography really is. So pretty much that was an introduction to geography, which was that pretty much encompasses the first unit, which pretty much represents the basic concepts in geography. So now that we are done with that, um, before we get into the next lesson, I would like for us to have some review first. So this will be a review. We are going to look at two different FRQs. I also have the solutions um, on another tab, and we're pretty much going to go through them pretty much in the FRQ section of AP Human Geography in the AP Human Geography exam. Each FRQ is usually dedicated to a single topic or a subtopic, or sometimes a mixture of two or three topics that synergize well together. Um, Usually, the first unit, since it's on basic concepts, it's usually the FRQs that represented are usually by themselves. They aren't mixed together with other units usually. Um, Most of the time, the FRQs are not from the first unit, they are from other units, but that doesn't mean they can't be from the first unit. And even if you don't get an FRQ that's from the first unit, uh, the other FRQs based on future topics are based or built upon the first unit. So that's very important to note, and you will certainly get MCQ questions based on this. So I think it's important that we go over some practice today. So the first FRQ, let's just have a read. The map above shows the distribution of three religious groups in the contiguous United States. Okay, so that's a map above. That's the legend, group X, group Y, group Z, religious groups. Let's look at the title, predominant church affiliation by county. So year 2000, so there are various counties and they are shaded, and what that shade represents is in the legend below, a religious group. And I'm assuming, well, you would assume that it's a Christian religious group because it does say predominant church affiliation. So um, there's that, and America is mostly Christian. So considering that, perhaps these groups, although they don't say exactly what they are probably Christian subdivisions, and it does say the year 2000, so it is quite old actually. So let's get into it and read the question. Using the letters in the legend, name the three religious groups shown on the map. Now, this is more of a background knowledge question, um, but it isn't too difficult. So if you look at it, Group Z, that's in the southeast, Florida, Georgia, around that, Texas. You have Group Y, that's in the mid north. You have Group X, that's in the west, not far west in California, but around Midwest. So, well, what would that be? Well, this a simple background question, and if you are familiar with it, well, the X, those are the Mormons or Latter-day Saints. The Y, those are the Lutherans, and Z, well, those are the Baptists, or you could say Southern Baptists. You receive a point for each one of them. It's more of a background knowledge question, so if you did not know that, well, I guess that's unfortunate, but you could score well on the other sections, and it's more of a general knowledge type of question. Let's look at B. For one of the three religious groups, first identify and then explain two factors that have influenced the distribution shown on the map. So you could pick any of them, the Mormons, Lutherans, or Baptists. It's up to you. really. So you have the freedom. Obviously, you have to know at least one of them, or you have to be able to identify at least one of them in order to answer part B successfully. So make sure you know at least one of them, and whichever is easier, then go deeper into that and explain that. Well, we'll go through each one of them. For the Mormons, that's Region X. So um, part of the reason or how they were um, distributed. So or the two factors that influence the distribution, that's kind of like a diffusion question, so you can look at it that way. So well, what caused that? Well, um, migration was part of the reason that caused that. Mormonism, you could read this, but it's mainly due to migration. When migration happened to the west, and that's where the Mormons settled. So that's part of the reason why the Mormons are settled in the Midwest. So you could talk about migration. You could talk about the physical environment. So it was arid, and it was a rigorous climate with lack of water. You could also look at the Lutherans in the north. And again, you can talk about migration. A lot has to do with migration, um, because well, that's really how these people spread. Because unlike disease, um, which is a contagious diffusion, um, most of the migration of people, that's usually locational. That's migrational. So they move from one place to another. So you can use migration a lot to explain a lot of these. Even for the Baptists, you could talk about migration. You could also talk about the indigenous religions and how well Baptist religion matured as an indigenous religion in the South, which was based on Calvinism. So um, it appealed to African Americans, and African Americans dominate the South, Georgia, etc., this region. So that's part of the reason why most of the Baptists are in that region, which is why you would say the group Z are actually Baptists. So you can talk about that, a lot about migration. So that is something important to note. So you do need to identify and explain these and deeply. Now let's look at part C. While explain how the map as presented at this scale is an incomplete representation of the geography of religion in the United States. Well, this is probably the easiest question. Well, in the map you only see three religious groups, but is that all? Are these all the religions in America? Well, no. In America there are a lot of religions, um, many kinds, and this map is only showing three of them, which is one of the reasons you might say it's incomplete. You can also say, well, map does not show small areas where other religions dominate. Yeah, um, as I said, it doesn't show other religions. It doesn't show areas where density of adherence is really high. Yeah, so it just shows that those religious people are in those places, but doesn't show the density, like how many of those people are in those places. So again, it's church. Although um, there are only three subdivisions of the Christian religion shown on the map. They're much more Catholics, etc. So this is definitely incomplete. You could talk about how the map masks much of the diversity and variation, yeah, because it only shows three of them. It doesn't view sub-county, yeah, only views counties, and it overgeneralizes again. It only shows three, it only shows in counties, it doesn't show the density to summarize. So that's pretty much part C, and that's pretty much the first FRQ. Now, um, the first question, or part A, hinged a lot on background knowledge. Part B, it mainly had to do with migration. If you talked about that, you would be okay. And part C was fairly easy. So that was pretty much the first FRQ. Let's look at our second FRQ, solutions to which I also have right here. Um, or yep, right here. Now let's read them. Uh, Regional migration patterns within the contiguous United States are the result of several factors. The map above shows net migration at the county level, but these data support generalizations about migration patterns at the regional scale. So, net in migration, that's migration coming in, net out migration, that's migration going out. And this is the map. It shows where there's a lot of migration going in, and on the lighter shade where there's a lot of migration going out. So as you would expect, a lot of major cities like LA, New York, and in Florida, a lot of the major places, Dallas, etc., they have net in migration, people going in, and more of the rural areas where a lot of people don't live, they have a lot of net out migration or people going out. Okay, so that's pretty much what it is. Identify two specific regions that have experienced net in migration. So you just have to know the map of the United States. Net in, that's black. Well, what regions are black? Can you identify? Well, there are a lot of them, and here are some of them. Um, you could say Pacific Northwest, Southwest, Northeast, Southeast. Now you could give those specific examples. Um, the Southwest, Northwest, these are very populated areas. Upper Great Lakes, Michigan, etc. You could give specific state names: Arizona, Maryland, um, Arizona, Maryland, Delaware, Tennessee. There's a lot, and um, other states can also be accepted if you are giving specific examples. For example, Oregon. Not all of Oregon is net in migration, but the western part is. So if you said that, that would also count. So yeah, if you're too generic or you didn't specify enough, well, you wouldn't get a point for that. So that's pretty much part A, fairly easy. Part B, it's the opposite. It's the same thing, but you look at net out migration. So, well, what are the net out migrations? So, well, you could say the Great Plains, Midwest, Rust Belt, um, mainly where there are not a lot of people. Alabama, North Dakota, Montana, these places where there are not a lot of people, or the states that are mainly net out. They have a lighter shade. Those are the states you could say, or except states you could also be more specific. Northern Maine, yeah, over there. Maine, the southern Maine is mainly black, but the north is net out. So you could get specific, give state names. You could give region names. So yep, you have a lot of that. So New York, etc. And that's pretty much part B. Now let's look at part C. This might be more difficult. Explain the processes that contribute to the general patterns of migration within the US shown on the map in terms of each of the following. So, well, there's net in, net out, but what contributed to that? What contributed to that based on economic structure? Secondly, based on the friction of distance, which we discussed. And lastly, based on age structure. So economic structure, the economy, age structure. Well, the number of old people, young people, how age is structured. And number two, as we discussed, interaction based on distance. Now, economic structure, you could say, well, they're changing techniques, practices in the primary sector, um, which we'll go into more detail, but pretty much like that deal with raw materials as the primary sector, deindustrialization. So pretty much they're not as many jobs anymore because it's becoming less industrialized, less factories. So you can talk about suburbanization, more people moving out into the suburbs instead of going to the cities because cities are expensive. You can talk about that as economic structure. Friction of distance. Well, you can talk about telecommuting. Well, usually you would have to live close to your work, but now because of telecommuting, you could live far away from your work and still do your job. So you could again talk about suburbanization. People are willing to move farther away, so the coefficient of the friction of distance is decreasing. So it's more acceptable if you live far away, and there's less of an impact. So these are the things you could talk about for friction of distance. For age structure, well, young people, they are moving to areas with more employment choices, major cities, and couples, they're moving to the suburbs um, to have a more comfortable environment where they can raise their children, where they can have a happy family. So you talk about that. Talk about the older generation. So people who retire, they're moving to retirement areas such as Sunbelt, Florida, because of weather amenities. They're moving to the suburbs. So you could talk about young and old people. So that's pretty much the reason why the migration pattern is as it is. So you could talk about these things, and that's pretty much the second FRQ. Personally, I thought the second FRQ is easier because it relied less on background knowledge, but sometimes you do need background knowledge. And if you did have background knowledge, the first FRQ might be much easier. So those are both FRQs for the first unit. So that's pretty much it. We will look at the second unit later on, but that pretty much concludes our activity today. I hope you guys learned something, and you guys learned more or had a good review. So that's pretty much it. And with that, I'll say goodbye.